You may not be aware of this, but right now the vestry and I are working together through a book about healthy communication and healthy church leadership practices. And one of the topics in this book of healthy practices is transparency. It's very important to be transparent. So I'm going to be transparent with you this morning, and I'm going to tell you that there was a time in my life when, before I was ordained, when I would sit in the pews of a congregation, and the sermons that would make me the most uncomfortable were the sermons that had to do with stewardship. Stewardship. Now, why do those kinds of sermons make me uncomfortable? And I can tell you why. Because there was a time in my life when I was not doing very well financially. I did not know how I was going to afford my next meal. I didn't know how I was going to afford to pay the electric bill or other utilities. I didn't know how I was going to be able to afford my rent. And when the priest would stand in front of the congregation and talk about stewardship, I would feel things like guilt and shame and fear. Guilt because I wasn't giving enough, and shame because I was a bad person because I wasn't giving enough, and fear because what if God is going to do something bad to me because I don't give enough financially? Right? Those are real concerns that people have. And so let me be the first one to tell you that if you are in that position, I do not want you to feel that way. I do not want you to feel that way, and I want you to know that the church is here for you. The church is here for you, okay? And at the same time, the other side of that coin is true. The other side of that coin is true, because stewardship is about community. It's about community, and when we have a time of abundance, we share with our community. It's about relationship building. It's about relationship building amongst yourselves. It's about relationship building between you and me. It's a relationship between all of us and God. When we have good stewardship, we establish those relationships with each other and with God, and we build them more fully. We have better relationships with each other. Okay? Now, I've studied quite a bit of theology, and in my studies, I've come across kind of a paradox. It's a paradox, and maybe even a heresy, because I've discovered in my theological studies that even though we say God can do anything, if we study theology, we realize that God is bad at math. He doesn't do well at math. And you say, Father Tim, what are you talking about? What do you mean he doesn't do well at math? I want you to think about maybe when you were in second grade and you started learning math word problems. And you probably remember something along the lines of a problem where Carol has 5 oranges and Joe doesn't have any oranges, and Carol gives 2 of her oranges to Joe. How many oranges does Carol have left? And the answer is 3. So Carol has fewer oranges than she had before, doesn't she? When it comes to theology, when we give of ourselves, we don't have less of ourselves. We actually have more of ourselves. We have more of ourselves. That's pretty amazing, isn't it? It's pretty amazing. I'll give you an example of what I mean. When we have something good in our lives and we share it with somebody else, it brings us fulfillment. Brings us fulfillment. There's something in our brains that makes us feel good when we give of ourselves. An example is, think of a time when you've had a wonderful meal with somebody you care about a lot. A wonderful meal. For me and my wife, the first place I think of was Rome. When we went to Rome together, and I can remember sitting on the cobblestone walkway there, the cafe outside, the Pantheon was right there next to us. And I remember being served about the most delicious meal I've ever had. And what did I want to do? Well, I wanted to share some of that meal with my wife. It was so good that I wanted to share it with her, right? Because I wanted her to experience what I was experiencing, and her experiencing what I was experiencing brought me joy. And you'd think, well, the opposite should be true. You'd think if this meal was so good, you'd think, well, I would want to have every single bite, right? But that's not how it works. That's not how it works, because we have a chemical in our brain that's released it's rewarded on being generous. If we take someone out to a birthday meal, we actually feel better about taking that person out for a meal than if we were the person being taken out for a meal. Can you believe that? That's how stewardship works in abundance. Right? When we give of ourselves, we actually get so much more. So much more. And of course, we talk about financial stewardship. Right? And I've heard all the jokes, by the way. I've been around this business for a while. I've heard all the jokes about the church just wants people's money and all that. But guess what? That's not true. That's not true. The church doesn't just want people's money. The church wants to do good work in the world. And the money that we gain here, that we use for stewardship purposes, helps us to be the fullest expression of who we are. All of these wonderful ministries are funded by good stewardship, by healthy stewardship, by active and engaged stewardship that help us to be the fullest expression of who we are. Okay? Now there's three major components that we talk about when we talk about stewardship. Time, talent, and treasure. Right? We've all heard those three T words before, haven't we? We've heard those. Right? So the treasure is obviously the financial piece. If we are in a place of financial abundance, then it is our responsibility to support the mission of the church in that capacity. But there are lots of ways that we can do that in ways that are other than financial. Right? Our talents are wonderful when they come together because they make a wonderful body of work in action. Because there are probably some things that I can do well that maybe you can't do as well. And there are probably just as many things that you can do well that I can't do well. And there are things that other people do that other people can't do. And when we put together, we accomplish a whole lot together. Right? So we think of an orchestra, maybe. An orchestra, where a violin on its own sounds very beautiful. Violin music is beautiful. But it's so much more beautiful and so much more rich and so much more full when we have the other instruments of the orchestra playing in harmony with the violin. It all works together to create this beautiful, rich, full sound. Right? So that's what our talents do when we put them together. And we get that same reaction in our brains. We get that same reaction in our brains. For me, I love to cook. But the reason I love to cook, the joy that I get in cooking, isn't from the eating of the meal. The joy that I get from cooking is when I serve you the meal and I see that expression on your face that I've made something that you really enjoy. That's what I'm talking about, is that feeling of joy when we feel warm because we've done something that someone else appreciates. Right? So we can give of ourselves in that capacity, of our talents. We can put our talents to work and contribute to that fuller expression of who we are as a congregation. And if you're like me and you say, well, gee, I don't have any talents. Well, guess what? We've all got time. We've all got time. And there is a valuable component of time. Time has value. Volunteer hours have value. Because think about it. If there is a task that needs to be done and volunteers don't show up, one of two things has to happen. Either the task doesn't get accomplished or we have to pay someone to accomplish it. So volunteers contribute to making sure that we have everything we need to function and to spread the good news to the people of God, and at the same time it doesn't have an added cost to it. Okay, so what I want us to do is I want us to think about the first line of today's gospel, where Jesus taught us the importance of praying. Jesus taught us how important it is to pray. And not because like the person in the story where the person just says, okay, fine, I'll give of myself. Right? That's not what we want. We want it prayerful. I want you to be prayerful in your discernment. And you probably have received by now at least one letter. If you haven't, there's one on its way, right? That's going to ask you to prayerfully consider how you wish to support St. John's in that stewardship campaign, in the stewardship campaign. And when I say prayerfully, I want us to think about all of those things. I want us to think about what are the things that I have that I want to share with my community. Because I think it's important that you hear this. This is an active and vibrant community, and you do such wonderful ministry in the world. I'm sure that if we won the lottery, we wouldn't just frivolously spend the money. We would use the money to propagate the gospel into the world, to spread the good news into the world. So we each get to ask ourselves, we get to spend time in prayer, ask ourselves, how is God telling me to use my time and my talent and my treasure to help spread the good news to the people of the world? Because St. John's does that in such a wonderful way. This is such a wonderful community. Right? So we get to think about what that means to us on the individual level. What does it mean to me to be part of this wonderful community? And our goal is to have 100% participation. 100% of families here we want to see fill out a pledge form. Okay, now you might be saying, well, Father Tim, what if I give every week, but I can't really make a commitment to giving a certain amount every week, right? Sometimes I have more cash flow, other times I have less, and I don't know what I'm going to, and I can't make a solid commitment. Well, did you know that it's a perfectly appropriate pledge submission to pledge $0? It's perfectly appropriate. If you need to pledge $0, you're still pledging. You're still pledging your support for this place. You are affirming that you are in a good place and you want this place to continue forward. Now, of course, you can give more than your $0, and in fact, hope that you do. But if that's what you can pledge, then that's what you can pledge. And if we receive a pledge card from every family, 100% participation, then that shows how committed we are to making sure that we are the fullest expression of who God wants us to be. So it's through our stewardship that we get to be that full expression. We get to play a role in God's poor math skills and give of ourselves so that we can be so much more. So that we can be so much more. Because St. John's is a wonderful place. And through our stewardship, we continue to make it a wonderful place. And through our stewardship, we continue to be the fullest and most robust expression of who it is that God is calling us to be, so that we can go out into the world and bring the good news to His people all over the world. Amen.